Can I pause on that?
Sure.
Because it's to me, just as a layman, it's surprising
Yeah.
that you can break down sentences in mostly all
All
languages
languages, I think.
into a tree.
I think so.
That's weird.
I've never heard of
That's
anyone
weird.
disagreeing with that.
That's weird.
The details of the trees are what people disagree about.
Well, okay. So what's the root of a tree? How do you construct? How hard is it? What is the process of constructing a tree from a sentence?
Well, this is where, depending on what there's different theoretical notions. I'm going to say the simplest thing, dependency grammar. It's like a bunch of people invented this. Tainier was the first French guy back in, the paper was published in 1959, but he was working on the 30s and stuff. So, and it goes back to, philologist Panini was doing this in ancient India. Okay. And so, doing something like this, the simplest thing we can think of is that there's just connections between the words to make the utterance. And so let's just say I have like 2 dogs entered a room. Okay, here's a sentence. And so we're connecting 2 and dogs together. That's like there's some dependency between those words to make some bigger meaning. And then we're connecting dogs now to entered, right? And we connect a room somehow to entered. And so I'm going to connect to room and then room back to entered. That's the tree. The root is entered. That's the thing is like an entering event. That's what we're saying here. And the subject, which is whatever that dog is 2 dogs it was. And the connection goes back to dogs, which goes back to then that goes back to 2. That's my tree. It starts at entered, goes to dogs down to 2. And on the other side, after the verb, the object, it goes to room, and then that goes back to the determiner or article, whatever we want to call that word. So there's a bunch of categories of words here we're noticing. So there are verbs. Those are these things that typically mark, they refer to events and states in the world. And they're nouns, which typically refer to people, places, and things is what people say, but they can refer to they can refer to events themselves as well. They're marked by, how they get used. The category, the part of speech of a word is how it gets used in language. It's like that's how you decide what the category of a word is, not by the meaning, but how it gets used.
How it's used.
Yeah.
What's usually the root? Is it going to be the verb that defines the event?
Usually, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If I don't say a verb, then there won't be a verb, and so it'll be something else.
What if you're messing? Are we talking about language that's like correct language? What if you're doing poetry and messing with stuff? Is it then rules go out the window, right? Then it's
no.
You're still
No. You're constrained by whatever language you're dealing with. Probably you have other constraints in poetry, such that you're like usually in poetry, there's multiple constraints that you want to usually convey multiple meanings is the idea, and maybe you have like a rhythm or a rhyming structure as well. And but you usually are constrained by the rules of your language for the most part, and so you don't violate those too much. You can violate them somewhat, but not too much. So it has to be recognizable as your language. Like in English, I can't say dogs 2 entered room. I meant that, 2 dogs entered a room, and I can't mess with the order of the articles and the nouns. You just can't do that. In some languages, you can mess around with the order of words much more. You speak Russian. Russian has a much freer word order than English. And so in fact, you can move around words in, I told you that English has the subject, verb, object, word order. So does Russian. But Russian is much freer than English. And so you can actually mess around with the word order. So probably Russian poetry is going to be quite different from English poetry because the word order is much less constrained.
Yeah, there's a much more extensive culture of poetry throughout the history of the last 100 years in Russia. And I always wondered why that is. But it seems that there's more flexibility in the way the language is used. There's more, you're morphing the language easier by altering the words, altering the order of the words, messing with it.
Well, you can just mess with different things in each language. And so in Russian, you have case markers, right, on the end, which are there's these endings on the nouns, which tell you how it connects, each noun connects to the verb, right? We don't have that in English. And so when I say, Mary kissed John, I don't know who the agent or the patient is except by the order of the words, right? In Russian, you actually have a marker on the end. If you're using a Russian name, and each of those names, you'll also say, is it, agent, it'll be the, a nominative, which is marking the subject, or an accusative will mark the object. And you could put them in the reverse order. You could put accusative first, You could put subject. You could put the patient first, and then the verb, and then the subject, and that would be a perfectly good Russian sentence, and it would still mean Mary. I could say John kissed Mary, meaning Mary kissed John, as long as I use the case markers in the right way. You can't do that in English. And so
I love the terminology of agent and patient and and the other ones you used.
Well,
those are sort of linguistic terms, correct?
Those are for like kind of meaning. Those are meaning. And subject and object are generally used for position. So subject is just like the thing that comes before the verb, and the object is the one that comes after the verb. The agent is kind of like the thing doing it. That's kind of what that means, right? The subject is often the person doing the action, right? The thing. So yeah.
Okay, this is fascinating. So how hard is it to form a tree in general? Is there a procedure to it? Like if you look at different languages, is it supposed to be a very natural, like is it automatable, or is there some human genius involved in construction?
I think it's pretty automatable at this point. People can figure out the words are. They can figure out the morphemes, which are technically morphemes are the minimal meaning units within a language. Okay. And so when you say eats or drinks, it actually has two morphemes in English. There's the root, which is the verb, and then there's some ending on it which tells you, that's this third person singular.
Can you say what morphemes are?
Morphemes are just the minimal meaning units within a language, and then a word is just kind of the things we put spaces between in English, and they have a little bit more. They have the morphology as well. They have the endings, this inflectional morphology on the endings on the roots.
They modify something about the word that adds additional meaning.
They tell you, yeah. And so we have a little bit of that in English, very little. You have much more in Russian, for instance. But we have a little bit in English, and so we have a little on the nouns. You can say it's either singular or plural, and you can say same thing for verbs, like simple past tense, for example. So notice in English we say drinks. He drinks, but everyone else is I drink, you drink, we drink. It's unmarked in a way. And then, but in the past tense, it's just drank. For everyone, there's no morphology at all for past tense. There is morphology. It's marking past tense, but it's an irregular now. So we don't even, drink to drank. It's not even a regular word. So in most verbs, many verbs, there's an ed we kind of add. So walk to walked, we add that to say it's the past tense. That I just happened to choose an irregular because it's a high frequency word, and the high frequency words tend to have irregulars in English. For
what's an irregular?
Irregular is just there isn't a rule. So drink to drank is an irregular.
Drink, drank. Okay.
As opposed to walked, talked.
And there's a lot of irregulars in English.
There's a lot of irregulars in English. The frequent ones, the common words, tend to be irregular. There's many more low frequency words, and those are regular ones.
The evolution of the irregulars are fascinating because it's essentially slang that's sticky because you're breaking the rules, and then everybody uses it and doesn't follow the rules.
Yeah.
And they say screw it to the rules.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.